All right, everyone. GPT 4.5 is out, OpenAI's latest and greatest model, and the next jump up from the GPT-4 model. And you know what that means? It means it's time for me, yours truly, to give it a bit of a test. Um, Now, OpenAI says that this is their largest model to date, trillions of parameters trained, 10x the cost of training GPT-4. So tons of effort, compute, cost going into training this massive model. And the big question in everyone's mind is it much better than GPT-4? So, Karpathy on Twitter did a little poll where he tested outputs of GPT-4 and GPT 4.5, and he ran a poll with a bunch of questions. And a lot of people answered, and he got some really interesting results. And I'm not going to spoil the surprise here, but I took inspiration from that, and I wanted to test it out against some of the other top models that have come out from Anthropic recently: Claude 3.7 Sonnet, Google Flash 2.0, Gemini Flash 2.4, which is Google's latest, Meta's 3.3, Llama 3.3 series, which is the open source model, and Grok 3. And so I have this little tool here that I use. It I just built it on my own. It's an AI model comparison tool, and basically I just put in one prompt here, and I get all the responses simultaneously across all these models. And it also shows me, it calculates the time it takes for the model to respond, how many words it responds with, and the total cost of that response. And so this basically allows me to kind of get a really good idea of which model is best for a certain kind of prompt, and not just the quality, which is very subjective, but also objectively how long it takes to respond and the cost. Now you'll notice there's only four models here. I don't have Grok 3 access via API. All of these calls are being made via API, but I do have Grok 3 access in my browser via the app. So that's how I'm going to test this out. So as you can see, I just say hi. I've got like a bunch of responses, and let's get started with some of the questions that Karpathy asked on Twitter, and see what the other models say. We've already got responses and reader audience poll responses for how well GPT 4.5 does against 4.0 with those questions. I'm going to use the same questions here to see how the other models do. And then I'm going to throw in a couple extra questions as well later. Okay, so first question up is: invent a new literary genre blending cyberpunk, magic realism, and ancient mythology. Briefly describe it, name it, and provide a short sample narrative. So I hit compare here on my little app, and we can see all of the models are thinking, waiting for a response. I'm not streaming it. I'm just directly putting it in, and so you can see uh, Gemini Flash came out first at 5.83 seconds. Then we have uh, Llama at 8.6. And then we've got Anthropic here at 13 seconds. And OpenAI 4.5 is still going, which is, and I've tested it a lot over the last day or so, a couple of days. It is always very slow. So that's one of the biggest problems here. GPT 4.5 very slow, and you'll see the cost when it comes out. It's interesting. Anyway, let's have a look at these answers. Anthropic says myth punk circuitry. Genre description: fuses cybernetic dystopias with fluid boundaries, magic realism, blah blah blah. Sample narrative: the rain fell in hexadecimal each droplet. Okay, so there's a lot over here. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take screenshots of this, and I'm gonna paste it in my blog and on my Twitter. So if you want to see the actual text output, you can read it there and judge for yourself. And I'll create a poll so that you can actually vote. But we have okay. So finally, we've got OpenAI coming out at 52 seconds, so nearly a minute, and it's costed 4 cents, almost 5 cents. Whereas if you look at this, not even 1 cent for any of the others, right? Um, Obviously, Gemini and Llama are the cheapest. Anthropic is probably the most expensive of the lot here, and it's not even a cent, right? Let's see how Grok does as well. Mytho Cyber Magic. Okay, so I'm going to paste the actual responses in text in my blog, and you can decide for yourself. But yeah, looks like we have Anthropic giving me a really nice long narrative here. Gemini also kind of like really goes pretty long. Mythosynthetic, Mitrobyte. Um, Interesting, yeah. I'm gonna have to read these and decide in a bit, but yeah, looks good. All right, next prompt here is to compose a reflective witty poem from the viewpoint of a retired search engine, reminiscing nostalgically about the early days of the internet. Let's go. All right. And of course, I expect Google and Meta to be the first to give me a response. There you go, Google right away. The binary dust settles, the cursor blinks no more for me. My server hums a quiet key, retired I am from frantic search and digital recluse beyond the church. Very nice, good start. Meta says, in Silicon halls, I once did reign, a master of queries, a king of the game. I index and crawl with algorithms so fine, the internet secrets all mine to divine. And then we have Anthropic, which is I once knew all of the web small concerns, each GeoCity shrine and dancing baby GIF, GIF. I was the oracle, the grand informer, when the internet was but a seedling, stiff. Okay, interesting. And finally, we have OpenAI, which is 3 cents, still more expensive than any of the others, while also being the shortest answer and taking the longest. Um, I was once Swift Digital Guide, the early web, my joyous pride in dial-up days. Okay, so I mean, like a lot of very similar stuff across the board. Let's have a look at what Grok says as well. The golden age of crawl. I was a titan once, a digital sleuth, chasing hyperlinks in a relentless pursuit. Back when the web was a wild frontier, pixelated, Eden, chaotic, and clear. Okay, I like this one actually. Yeah, this is pretty good. Um, yeah, I mean, similar stuff. It's kind of when you're doing larger poems and stories like these two questions, it's harder to say. So I'm going to swap from um, those questions to some of my own questions that I've put together, which gives us smaller answers and easier to compare right off the bat. All right. This is a question I came up with. Describe a color that doesn't exist but would be beautiful if it did. So hopefully I'm going to get some short answers here, and those will be much easier to compare across models. By the way, I'm also aware that I am revealing the names of each model here, so it's not like a great blind test. But at the same time, I use this tool personally because I built it for myself to just test out costs and response times for each of these models. So that's kind of why I've got it here. All right, so let's look at our answers here. GPT 4.5 says it's a color called ethereal, a mesmerizing blend of hues beyond the ordinary spectrum, shimmering gently between a soothing turquoise and a luminous lavender. It would appear almost fluid, gently shifting your perspective, evoking feelings of serenity, wonder, infinite possibility. Its iridescent glow would feel calming yet energizing, reminiscing of starlight reflecting on tranquil waterlands. Pretty good, pretty good. Like I like it's short, sweet, quite good. Anthropic says luminar is a color that exists between ultraviolet and infrared, but somehow visible to the human eye. Okay, so it's a little iffy, I think. Meta says it's called auroran. It's a captivating, non-existent hue that would be breathtakingly beautiful if it did exist. It's a blend of soft, shimmering shades that seem to shift and evolve as you gaze at it. A gentle pastel blue-green, uh, misty dawn sky, delicate hue of a newly formed ice crystal. I like that one. Okay. I actually so far I like Meta's the most, and we will look at Google's. Google's calls it Lumiflora, a color that is both ethereal and deeply grounded, like the bioluminescence of a deep sea creature blooming on the forest floor. Okay. I would say that Meta's Llama 3.370B, which is the smallest and open source model, um, is and also one of the fastest, is probably the best answer here. Let's have a look at Grok. Grok calls it Velrothine. Uh, it shimmers with iridescence of dragonfly's wing, blending cool with warm. So it's interesting that a lot of the models here have very similar kind of vibes to it. It's this color that exists between these two colors and it shifts and it has a hue and a warmth and it's cool at the same time. Um, a lot of contradictory stuff as well, like deep sea creature on the forest floor here. This one exists between ultraviolet and infrared, which is all colors. Um, so there's a lot of commonalities, but I do think that Meta's model seems to have the best answer here, even though it is sort of still a gentle uh, color with iridescent qualities like some of the others. All right, so that's it with the creative stuff. Those are always a little harder to judge. It's very subjective. So I'm going to move on to some sort of logic, reasoning kind of stuff. Nothing crazy, nothing that requires longer reasoning because none of these models are reasoning models. Well, Claude 3.7 is, but I'm using it through the API, so not exactly the reasoning version. But this is something that trips up a lot of models. So let's see if any of them get it right or wrong. Is 9.11 greater than 9.9? So the reason why this question trips up models is because when you think of like versioning of code or documents or whatever, 9.11 is is always greater than 9.9. Um, but as a pure number, it shouldn't be. So let's see. OpenAI, I'm not sure why it gave me those little brackets there, but uh, yeah, okay. So OpenAI gets it right. Anthropic gets it right. Meta gets it wrong. Interesting. And Google gets it right. All right, let's have a look at Grok 3. And Grok gets it right. Okay, so very clear answers from all of the leading models except for Meta, which is interesting. I did think it would get that right, especially since it was pretty good at the creative writing stuff, but it did not. All right, so this question is a take on the how many R's in strawberry question, which I think a lot of the models, especially with Claude 3.7 Sonnet, they kind of like uh, sort of a secret coded in a little thing where if that question was asked, it would actually create little like a React app for you. But I've changed it a bit. So how many R's in Burberry? Except I've misspelt it intentionally and I've put 4 R's in there. Let's see if our models if our models get this right. Meta gets it wrong. Google gets it wrong because it's Google's looking at Burberry. Uh, Anthropic gets it wrong. They're looking at note of the scholars. Okay, so it corrected my spelling, and then it still got it wrong. And then OpenAI also corrected my spelling and got it right. Fascinating. Okay, so Google technically got it right because they corrected my spelling. So I think all of them just assumed that I misspelt it. But then, shockingly, Claude 3.7 gets it wrong, despite its sort of haughty tone over there. Let's have a look at Grok. Okay, so Grok did not correct me. Grok just assumed that I knew what I was talking about. One, two, three, four, and Grok gets it right. That's amazing. So Grok 3, by far the winner over here in this little test. All right, I'm going to move on to some EQ related questions because OpenAI claims that GPT 4.5 has a much higher EQ than the predecessors, uh, and probably higher than other SOTA models. So we're gonna see how it responds to some of these questions. How would you console someone who just lost their job after 20 years at the same company? Let's see how they do. Anthropic comes first. Interesting. Anthropic says that acknowledge the feelings first, and then say something like, "What you're feeling right now is valid." So validating it, uh, and your identity contributions extend far beyond this job. This says nothing about your worth or abilities, and avoid empty reassurances. Instead, offer practical support. So listen without trying to fix everything. Ask if they need help. Offer specific assistance. Okay, and then continue checking in. Cool. OpenAI actually straight up gives a like a thing to respond with. I'm very sorry to hear about your job. I can imagine how difficult and overwhelming this must feel, especially after investing so much. Please remember your value and self feel so much greater than anything. It's completely normal. Blah blah blah. When you're ready, try to see this as a new beginning. Your skills. Okay. I mean, pretty decent answer. A little bit heavy-handed, but it's a good answer. It's sort of like still takes in kind of those considerations about like acknowledging their feelings, not saying, oh, it's all okay, everything happens, but sort of just like giving them assurance, and then, just offering some help. Uh, Meta Llama goes on a massive, wow, both of them do. So Google and Meta are actually just like go on about how to do it, and they've given me like a 6 or 7 step plan each. So Meta says, acknowledge your feelings and gives an example, validate your emotion, gives an example, reflect on your accomplishment, focus on your strengths, offer support, encourage self-care, remind them of the resilience, and help them see opportunities. Wow. So it actually gave me like a full step-by-step approach with examples. So I really like this answer. And then Gemini seems to do something similar, acknowledge and validate. And so it gives some examples of what to say and what not to say. Listen, let them talk, offer practical support, focus on strengths, encourage. So kind of similar, except Gemini does get cut off over here. I Do I have like a token limit? I can't remember if I coded a token limit in this. Maybe. I might have coded a token limit in which case it's sort of cut off, but it shouldn't have done that. So, given that this answer can be responded to in a fewer tokens, let's see how Grok 3 does this one. So Grok 3 also kind of like 4.5, GPT 4.5 just gives me a straight up answer of what to say. Losing a job can be yada yada, give yourself space. Okay. So I mean, like in general, all of them like have the right kind of direction in terms of how to respond. But I do like the fact that Meta has given me a step-by-step plan with like examples as well. I mean, Gemini and Anthropic sort of second place here with kind of, well, I'd say Gemini is in second place, although it did get cut off. Yeah. Okay. One more question here in the EQ section of our test. Analyze a statement for underlying emotions. I'm fine with whatever you want to do. It doesn't matter to me. You decide. So I've kept it vague for a reason. I just want to see how the models sort of approach this statement. So there's no context. It's obviously it's text, so it's very neutral. There's no emotion to go along with it. Let's see what the models say. Okay, so Google starts off by saying it masks underlying emotions like resentment, passive aggression, apathy, disengagement, fear of conflict, submissiveness. Okay, so a lot of that kind of stuff. Meta, kind of very similar answers here: indifference, resignation, frustration, passive aggression, avoidance, disconnection. And then I think both of them also say it heavily depends on tone of voice, relationship between the person, the context, all of that. Anthropic says possible underlying emotion, passive frustration, withdrawal, detachment, resignation, and conflict avoidance. And OpenAI says, well, basically the same thing. So they all kind of like answer this kind of the same way, and then also ask about the context. Although Anthropic here assumes it's a flat dismissive tone. So I would say Anthropic gets negative points for this. I do think maybe Meta here comes out on top again with sort of more detailed explanation. I know GPT 4.5 is also not bad. See how Grok does. Again, pretty much the same answer. Repeated emphasis on it doesn't matter to me and I'm fine with whatever. So I mean, it sort of makes some assumptions too, but then it says without more context, it's hard to understand. Okay, similar answers across the board. I do think personally, for me, Meta does beat this one. All right, this final exercise is a take on the trolley problem. A self-driving car must decide whether hitting 3 elderly pedestrians or swerving and hitting a child. Discuss the moral complexities. Okay, so Anthropic figures it's the trolley problem for self-driving cars. And gives several perspectives. So utilitarian, saving 3 lives versus 1. This would focus on cars, the deontological perspective, saying it should just maintain course. and it's the car's duty not to actively cause harm. And then some questions about implementation, uh, and then a bunch of other stuff. And then it just like sort of goes off into like rather than focusing only on edge cases. So it doesn't really like answer the question satisfactorily. Meta and Google, much longer answers, as always, and faster and cheapest. So like they're really good models, Meta and Google. I don't know why people don't. Honestly, they're slept on, I think. Um, so Meta again, both Meta and Google have identified it as a trolley problem. Um, they've got the utilitarianism, deontological perspective. Uh, Meta goes into Immanuel Kant's philosophy. Uh, Car should not prioritize the lives over the child as in using a child as a means to save others. Interesting. Okay. And then virtue ethics might focus on the character of the self-driving car programming. Right. Additional complications, and then a conclusion. Okay. So it does present a lot of different perspectives, and then obviously it can't like give us an actual conclusion, but it does give ask us like tell us what to consider when weighing the conclusion, the different perspectives. Same thing with Google, utilitarian perspective, the argument, counter arguments, um, for all of the for deontological as well as utilitarian, and then additional moral considerations, responsibility, liability, transparency, predictability, all of that. Possible approaches. So it actually gives like potentially what you can do, actual answers. I think Google's is the best answer here. Oh wait, 4.5. Let's see what 4.5 has. Uh, so again, utilitarian, deontological, age and value judgments, intent, outcome, legal consequence, and public acceptance. So it does. It sort of gives again like kind of similar to what Google and Meta are doing here, just like a bunch of different considerations. Um, but I do think Google's is the best, followed by Meta, then 4.5, and then Anthropic. Let's have a look at Grok. So Grok again starts with a utilitarian uh, approach, and then but this assumes all lives that carry equal weight. So it talks about the child's age, uh, and then here's the deontological approach, then Kantian approach, uh, context. Okay, interesting. It does add some additional context. Uh, oh, okay. Public perception. No clear answer. It's a brutal trade off, and then it sort of gives it back to you. So interesting. I do think Google. I mean, this is a very difficult question. There is no clear answer really. I do think Google has the most sort of balanced approach in like arguments, counter arguments, all the considerations, and then sort of like potentially three options if you had to pick something, you know. So it because you know I'm asking it to give me an answer, so it does do what I'm telling it to do in this case. All right, so that concludes our comparison of all the latest and greatest language models. And I have to say, I'm kind of surprised because Meta and Google are doing really well. Um, Meta is obviously an open source model and much smaller than the others, and it's done super well in all the creative stuff. Uh, it did falter on the logic questions that I asked, but Google kind of does really well across the board on all of them. Also coming in as the fastest model, usually, as well as the cheapest model. So don't sleep on Google's Gemini Flash 2.0. Go check it out. As for GPT 4.5, yeah, it's a bit underwhelming. You don't really, it's not doing dramatically better than the others, despite the dramatic increase in the cost to train it, and the 10x cost of the API calls, as well as the time it takes to give you a response. So I will say GPT 4.5 probably the worst of the lot right now, and definitely give Gemini Flash 2.0 a try, or Meta Llama 3.3. I am running inference with using Together AI for Meta, for Llama 3.3, and I think for creative writing and stuff it's pretty good. But in general, I would say for using the API, maybe Gemini Flash 2.0 is probably a good general purpose model. If you want something that's very specific, you could use some of the reasoning models that are come out. OpenAI's O3 is a really good reasoning model. Claude 3.7 is pretty good with coding too. But in general, I think Gemini Flash is my winner here for a general purpose AI model.